All right. I apologize in advance if the sound ain't that great, but I tried to make it better and shit. Anyway, chapter 18 is where we left off, goddammit. So let's just get into it. Nothing provokes deep thoughts on life and death like an exhibition of skinless corpses in creative poses. I caught up with the touring Body Worlds exhibit at the Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. As I expected, it was both fascinating and educational, but I was surprised that it ignited a philosophical flash fire within my mind. I had never seen the human body presented like this before, and it took me for a wild ride. Thanks to Gunther von Hagen's patented plastination process, lifelike dead people stood within arm's reach. No display case glass between us, no clothes, and no more guessing about what a human liver really looks like. These were not textbook-style, unnatural anatomical displays. These exhibits weren't designed to collect dust and put pre-med students to sleep. I was wandering among the most creative collection of corpses ever assembled. These were interesting people who just happened to be dead and missing their skin. Their poses seemed anything but posed. They ran, played chess, rode horses, kicked soccer balls. Some were split apart to allow for easy viewing of internal organs. Who knew dead people could be so lively? Anywho, I suspect that many believers who visit a Body Worlds exhibit see it as a confirmation of their claim that the human body is the magical creation of an artistic god. I can understand their feelings. I was close to being seduced by the body's divine design too. So many organs doing so many jobs, bones and muscles work in harmony to stand, walk, run, and jump. The vast and complex network of blood vessels, the heart that never sleeps, the brain's ability to store data, and its infinite power of imagination. How can all of this have just happened naturally with no help from a god? It's a fair question, and no believer should ever be faulted for asking it. Looking at the bodies of Body Worlds helped to open my eyes to the view many believers hold about the connection between the human body and their gods. Without a basic understanding of evolution, something most people don't have, by the way, nothing but a god can explain these magnificent machines. Any scientist or science-literate person who turns snobbish and dismissive of those who see a god's work in the human body might consider that they probably would have held the same view if they had not been fortunate enough to learn about evolution. Yes, the human body can be easily recognized as the producer of millions of years of evolution, but only if one has a basic biology education first. Short of that, a god seems like the only sensible answer. The controversy over teaching evolution in the United States and the popularity of creationism in that nation has been well reported in the media. But what about the entire continent of Africa? What percentage of children there get a competent education about the biological history of life on Earth? What about the Middle East, South America, the Caribbean? Probably the overwhelming majority of children on Earth in any given year never hear a single word about human evolution. No wonder millions of people can't imagine how nature could be responsible for the complexity of the human body. They have no idea of the age of the Earth and its life. They know nothing of genetic mutations and natural selection. I certainly never heard anything about evolution throughout my education in American public schools during the 1970s. Never once was human evolution mentioned, much less taught in my classes. Through 12 years of elementary, middle, and high school, not one teacher ever told me about the Australopithecus, Homo erectus, or Neanderthal. Nobody bothered to mention how my ancestors shaped stones into tools and tamed fire. No one ever told me the story of humankind's great walk out of Africa to populate the globe. Today, I look back and feel cheated. I should have been taught what science has learned about who I am and where I came from. Fortunately, I made up for lost time and learned about human evolution on my own and in university anthropology classes. But what about all my friends and classmates from elementary school through high school who never did learn what evolution was all about? They probably still have never heard about Olduvia Gorge, if I even said that right, the Leakey family, or Charles Darwin's voyage about the HMS Beagle. Most Americans today wouldn't know a Homo ergaster cranium from their own. So when they hear about their ancestors and the evolutionary trail that led to them, they reject it as absurd. It's preposterous because they don't understand it. And in most cases, the reason they don't know anything about evolution is because no one ever bothered to teach it to them. It's not entirely their fault. Their teachers, schools, school boards, and government failed them. No one should be surprised that half of the American population rejects evolution because it is easy to dismiss something you don't know anything about. Around the age of 10, I stumbled across a book called Early Man. It was loaded with great photos and artwork. I was fascinated by this story of human origins. I was amazed to learn that my ancestors lived in Africa, that they made stone chopping tools more than 1,000,000 years ago, and competed against other hominid species who lived alongside them. What made it even more exciting was that this story had actual evidence, fossils you could see for yourself. And the scientists even admitted that they didn't know all the answers. They were still learning the story. It all seemed so sensible and respectable. It was believable. Inspired by that book, I made my own stone tools in the backyard. I studied photographs of chopper tools and tried to reproduce them perfectly. I remember feeling uncomfortably inferior to my Homo erectus forebears because my tools never turned out quite as impressively as theirs. I even conducted my own digs. I remember I once excavated a bone from the woods near my home and comparing it to a photograph of Australopithecus fossils in the Early Man book. They matched up pretty well, and I was convinced that I had made a major discovery. Australopithecus in Florida. I was about to shake up the paleoanthropological world. I was going to be famous. For some reason, however, my mother was not convinced and refused to alert the media. She may not have known much about human evolution, but she did know a chicken bone when she saw one. My own experience with evolution prevents me from being too aggressive or judgmental toward believers who say evolution is nonsense and that creationism/intelligent design is valid science. Their schools probably failed them just like all of mine did. For this reason, I've never been inclined to argue with creationists. They don't need debates. They need information. They don't need to be beat up with superior arguments. They need books. I always prefer to simply share some basic information about evolution and leave it at that. For example, if someone came to me and declared that the earth is flat, I don't think it would make much sense to get all huffy and worked up over it. I know that the earth is spherical. People who think the earth is flat do not need to be argued into submission. They just need to be handed a few photos of the earth from space so they can go home and look over them in private. Most people who think evolution is a lie just need to be shown a Homo erectus skull. For example, I have museum-quality, full-sized replicas of Australopithecus, Homo erectus, and Neanderthal skulls at my home on a bookshelf. If a guest ever tells me that human evolution is a big fat lie, I'm ready. I don't need to argue. I'm just going to point to those skulls and ask, and then I wonder who those guys were. Evolution versus creationism is not smart people versus stupid people. It's not even believers versus non-believers, though many describe it that way. This is almost entirely a clash between people who have been exposed to the theory of evolution versus those who have not. I can never pretend to feel that I am necessarily smarter than a creationist who says biologically modern humans were created 10,000 years ago, or an intelligent design believer who says unanswered questions about the human body prove that a god designed it. I can't because I know that I easily could have ended up in their shoes. I suspect that if I had not come across that one book on human evolution many years ago in childhood, I might believe things like that too. There, but for the grace of a good science book, I go. Progressing through the body world's exhibit, I begin to pay more attention to the people around me as they react to the displays. Some of them never seem to get over their initial shock and horror. Others are obviously thrilled by it all. And there are some who shake their heads as if in awe of the magnificent organic machine before them. Awe, of course, often leads people to gods. As I stood in front of one of the bodies, I was okay with the fact that there are many things I do not understand about the human body and life itself. We are still a mystery in so many ways. One could graduate from medical school, work a long career in medical science, and still have more questions than answers. But is this reason enough to give up and declare that a god must have placed the lungs above the stomach and hair atop the head? I don't think so. The human body is not quite as impressive as some of us assume anyway. It's certainly not a perfect creation. Anthropologist Scott Atran makes that case in his essay, Unintelligent Design, in which he says, creationists and proponents of intelligent design often point to the human body as evidence of God's plan, of his intelligent design and benevolence towards his creatures. A closer look at our parts reveals that the deity may never have been wholly pleased with his preferred creations. Why did he invert the retina and give humans, but not the octopus, a blind spot? Why, in making us upright, did he render us so liable to back problems? Why did he give us just one head, one heart, and one liver, instead of two, like the lungs and kidneys? After all, having two lungs and kidneys is surely better than having one of each. If you have one and it fails, you die. If you have two and one fails, you live. Atron picks the anatomy involved in childbirth as the most imperfect design of all. He writes that it results from evolution's having jammed the outlets of three major expulsive functions into a narrow basin, the pelvis. The expulsion of the large-headed human fetus through a narrow region at childbirth occurs at considerable cost. The design flaw of human childbirth has had cascading effects. Human offspring profit from having big brains, but only at substantial cost to fitness of relatively high fatality rates for child and mother. Long periods of postnatal care, reduction in fertility rates, decrease in resource procurement, and so forth. No sensible God would ever have designed it this way, Atron concludes. I remember my first reaction upon entering the Body Worlds exhibit was to cringe a bit, as one naturally does in a room full of corpses. But the desire to learn pushed aside that reflex. I began working hard to see every detail and absorb as much of the experience as I could. Lungs, brains, livers, muscles, bones, teeth, blood vessels, hearts. It was all fascinating. How impressive, I thought. So many parts work so well together, allowing us to do so many things. This human machine of ours has climbed Mount Everest, swum the English Channel, walked on the moon, invented calculus, and run 100 meters in less than 9.8 seconds. It really is wonderful. But during my over-the-top adulation of human flesh and bone, I suddenly remembered that my glorious human body is no more special than that of a dog or a rat. We're all mammals. Size and proportion varies, and we have a much more complex brain, of course. But overall, we are far more alike than different. My initial excitement over Body Worlds is fading, and I noticed a shift in my thinking. These bodies all around me are not perfect. They were not magical creations. They were not miracles. They were convenient arrangements of atoms, shaped by evolution and made beautiful only by the whims of personal taste. These bodies represent the current version of fortunate meat whose ancestors managed to survive a gauntlet of natural selection spanning a few billion years or more. All bodies, not just the dead ones on display, are evidence of human evolution. We all walk around every day with the evidence of evolution. We are the proof. We have been designed by absence of intelligence in the we have been designed by nature over millions of years. Our many imperfections reveal the absence of intelligence in the process. Our more impressive features, the brain in particular, reveal the blind but immensely creative potential of evolution. This explanation for who we are and where we come from may lack the satisfying simplicity and glory of a typical God story, but at least it's an explanation that is supported by by the reality of what we see when we look in the mirror. I walked away from the Body Worlds exhibit convinced that the human body is no more special than any other warm-blooded, furry earth creature. This vehicle we ride around in is more like plumbing and tinker toys than magic from the sky. But there is one exception. Our brains truly are something special. We sing songs, write books, and dream of things that can never be. We also use these brains to seek answers. I see no justification to ever slow or shut down this wonderful organ. All believers who claim that the quote-unquote miraculous human body is evidence of magic might consider calling on that quote-unquote miraculous brain of theirs to learn more and think more before giving all credit to the gods. Chapter 19, my God sacrificed his only son for me. That's what I'm talking about. One of the most popular stories of all time is the one about a God who sent his only child on a mission to save the world, but in doing so, allowed him to be killed so that all the people of the earth might know peace and salvation. After his brutal death, the son magically rose up to heaven where he lives with his father today. We may all go to heaven and be with him after we die, but only if we believe in him and repent our sins. This, of course, is the core belief of Christianity. It must be a good story because Christianity is currently the planet's most popular religion with more than 2 billion followers. Although that leaves some 4 billion people who don't believe the story, it's still the most numerically successful religion of all time. As such, I thought it deserved comment, even though this justification for belief is specific to just one religion. The story of Jesus is appealing to many people who see it as the ultimate example of love, sacrifice, and God's overwhelming goodness. Many believers have told me how it touches them and how inspired they are by it. It is especially powerful when you consider a typical father's love for his child. God must really love me, some Christians say, if he would let his only son suffer and die for me. If one thinks a little deeper about this story, however, some problems emerge. First, what exactly is the great sacrifice that God made? And was it really a sacrifice in the way a human father giving up his son would be? I have a young son, and I cannot imagine the pain I would feel if, for some extraordinary reason, I had to let him suffer and die. I think it would be more than I could bear. But see, God did not lose his son, at least not in the way I or any other human would lose a son. God made no sacrifice. God lost nothing. The Christian doctrine known as the Holy Trinity claims that God exists in 3 forms: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Despite the fact that many Christians speak and worship as if these 3 are separate gods, Christianity considers itself a monotheistic religion, meaning it has just one God. So if one accepts the Holy Trinity doctrine, then one has to admit that the Father did not really sacrifice his Son. If anything, he was sacrificing himself or part of himself, but not really. Even if it somehow were a distinct and separate son that died, it wouldn't make sense as a great sacrifice because God the Father knows the future. How then can it be claimed that he gave up his only son for us when he knew that Jesus would rise from the dead and join him in heaven soon after? Where is the sacrifice? I love my son as much or more than any other father has. There is nothing superhuman or supernatural about me, but I believe I would do precisely what many believers say God the Father did 2,000 years ago. I would agree to sacrifice my son if I was confronted with the bizarre proposition of having to allow him to die in order to save billions of humans now and for generations to come from eternal torment in hell. Like God, I would know that my son would be fine and back with me a few days later anyway. I would be saving him from hell as well. So the correct decision is obvious. I would be highly upset about having to put him through the suffering part of it, but I would have to agree to the deal. Looking at the big picture, billions of people saved, including my son, and I get him back happy and healthy, would make it a no-brainer. And I certainly would not feel that I deserved heroic or godlike status for making that decision. Many Christians emphasize the suffering endured by Jesus prior to his death. According to the story, Jesus was tortured by Roman guards and then nailed to a cross. Like a bitch. Hold on, let me take a sip of this coffee. Jesus was tortured by Roman guards and then nailed to the cross like a bitch. That's a bad day by any measure, goddammit. The pain and terror he felt would have been unimaginable. No one who saw Mel Gibson's blood-spattered, bone-crunching film Passion of the Christ will ever take crucifixion lightly. The courageous suffering of Jesus adds a great deal to the story's power and appeal. He could have opted out, say believers. He could have been selfish, forgotten all about saving souls, and avoided the crucifixion, but he didn't. He took the pain for us, believers claim. However, it is fair to point out that many other people have suffered horrible deaths, as bad or even worse than what Jesus is supposed to have endured. And their suffering did not even save billions of people across future generations to come. More than 100 firefighters die on the job during a typical year in the United States, according to the U.S. Fire Administration. They died trying to save the lives and property of strangers. Usually, firefighters are not responding to massive disasters such as the World Trade Center attacks or dramatic chemical plant explosions. More often, they are rushing into small, smoke-filled homes, hoping to pull out 1 or 2 unconscious occupants. Sometimes the firefighters die. They do this without divine powers or knowledge of the future. These are people who are far less capable than gods, yet they are able to summon up the necessary courage and compassion to risk it all for people they don't even fucking know. Firefighters deserve to be worshipped over your Jesus. Throughout history, there have been warriors who were willing to sacrifice their lives for the lives of comrades. Of course, most soldiers are no different than anyone else. They want to live. They would rather be a hero and survive than be a hero and die. Most expect or hope that their heroic deeds on behalf of someone else will not get them killed. But surely there have been many cases over the last several centuries when warriors were in situations where they knew they would die, but still acted out of a sense of loyalty to a friend or for the sake of their society. How do these people compare to Jesus? They did not give their lives for billions, and they did not have the absolute assurance that they would rise from the dead and be fine afterward. They suffered and died for a handful of lives, or maybe even just one life. Yes, many of them may have believed they would go to heaven, but they could not have known it as confidently as a God would. So how are we to describe these brave, self-sacrificing mortals? Compared to Jesus, they gave up so much more for so much less. Don't we have to admit that the sacrifice that they make are far greater than a God's? I would think so. There's something even more troubling about this dramatic tale of love, death, and resurrection. If it really did happen, why did it have to happen that way? I first asked this question as a child many years ago and have yet to hear a good answer. Why would somebody, anybody, have to be nailed up on a cross in order for me to go to heaven? Was that really the best arrangement God could come up with? The all-powerful, all-knowing, you couldn't come up with nothing better than that? I gotta sacrifice my own son. I can't think of anything better. Dumbass. It makes no sense because he's the one who was writing the rules. Didn't he know how his creation was going to turn out? If so, then why would he make this whole redemption thing so cruel and barbaric? Why would a God set up a system that requires someone to be tortured and killed? I mean, I certainly wouldn't want anyone to have to suffer and die for me. I mean, it's odd that not all, but many Christians today view animal sacrifice as a terrible ritual that no one should have anything to do with. But when the human sacrifice story of Jesus is presented as evidence of God's moral greatness, 2.5 billion people applaud it. What the fuck? Make up your mind, people. How is it that you and I were born sinners anyway? Christians are forever telling me that I was a sinner at birth. The fuck? No matter how good I might try to be, I am bad, they say. It hardly seems fair that being born means you immediately need saving. What the fuck do we have to do with Adam and Eve's crimes? I never ate any fruit from any Garden of Eden, so why is it on my rap sheet? Do Christians ever wonder if there might have been another way for their God to give us a ticket to heaven, some other way than human sacrifice? I mean, what is it with your God and his thirst for blood, old vampire ass bitch? Why can't he just say, why can't we all just say, I'm sorry, or pay a fine, or work it off of community service? Why can't God just forgive us and leave it at that? I'm sure most of us could think of several ways to award salvation to humankind that don't require torture and sacrifice. I wonder how Christians would react to a similar story if it took place today. I mean, imagine if the king of a small country announced that he was going to have his son beaten, whipped, nailed to a tree, and then stabbed with a spear. During an interview on CNN, the king admits that he is sad that his son will suffer and die, but it must be done because it's the only way he can forgive the citizens of his country for their moral lapses and allow them access to health care and social services the following year. The king loves the people of his nation and wants his crimes pardoned, and he wants their crimes pardoned. So his son must die. What would you think of this king? Weird, cruel, evil, insane? But why would you expect a higher moral standard from the human king of a tiny country than you would from the God of the universe? Another challenge to the Jesus story is that it might not be quite as unique as most believers think it is. According to scholars, there are several ancient stories that sound remarkably familiar. Randall Helms, author of Fiction Gospels, describes one. In the 1st century of the Common Era, there appeared at the eastern end of the Mediterranean a remarkable religious leader who taught the worship of one true God and declared that religion meant not the sacrifice of beasts, but the practice of charity and piety and the shunning of hatred and enmity. He was said to have worked miracles of goodness, casting out demons, healing the sick, raising the dead. His exemplary life led some of his followers to claim that he was a son of God, though he called himself the Son of Man. Accused of sedition against Rome, he was arrested. After his death, his disciples claimed he had risen from the dead, appeared to them alive, and then ascended to heaven. So who was this teacher and wonder worker? His name was Apollonius of Tyana, and he died around 98 AD, and his story may be read in Flavius Philostratus's Life of Apollonius. Perhaps the biggest flaw with the Jesus story is that it hasn't worked very well. Christians claim that Jesus died for our sins so that we could all be saved, but the problem is that now, 2,000 years later, most people still aren't being saved each generation. Christians are a minority worldwide. The majority of people simply don't believe the Jesus story is true. Today, yes, there are 2.2 billion Christians, but there are 4.5 billion non-Christians. That's an awful lot of souls lost every generation. So if it really happened, not only was the sacrifice of Jesus strange and gruesome, it was also a mostly wasted effort that has failed to save the majority of people. Sounds like a dumbass plan to me from a dumbass God. Anyway, chapter 20. Atheists are jerks who think they know everything. How fitting. Anyway, atheists have an image problem. Some believers think that all atheists are on Satan's payroll. Others imagine that atheists are immoral frauds who know a God exists but won't admit it for fear of having to give up their vices. Still, other believers see atheists as arrogant jerks who think they know everything. Too smart for their own good, they say. So stubborn that they won't see the God standing right before them. Some believers say they would never stop believing in their God, even if it meant becoming one of those pompous fools. Believers may have a point here, but they go too far with it. There are rude and condescending atheists, of course, but aren't some believers rude and condescending too? Don't believe me? Just look at the comments in all of my religious videos. It is important to keep in mind that personalities and attitudes do not necessarily have anything to do with the existence of gods. God still might not exist even if every atheist in the world were an obnoxious jerk. One could not assume that gods exist even if every believer in the world were polite and humble. Much of this negative view believers have toward non-believers comes out of the clash of ideas about the world and universe around us. For example, it can be a challenge for science-literate non-believers to keep a cool head when in the presence of a believer who insists that the world is flat and 10,000 years old, or that angels and demons are all around us, or that life does not evolve. But this is no reason to belittle or abuse someone. Some of the most aggressive non-believers might try having a little more compassion and humility. For example, I never assume intellectual superiority when talking with a believer. They easily could be smarter than I am, regardless of how absurd some of their beliefs may be. If I had been homeschooled by Taliban or Amish parents, I probably would see the world very differently today. Would it be my fault? Would it be right for a non-believer to view me as a moron who can't think? Of course not. For most people in this world, it all comes down to what your parents believe and which school district you live in. The only fault that may be inexcusable is refusing to learn. Some believers accuse atheists of being stubborn and dogmatic. If they really are, then I join the believers in criticizing them. All of us, believers and non-believers, should maintain an open mind and be willing to learn new things, even if it contradicts some things we thought we knew for sure. I, for example, am willing to believe in a God, dump the theory of evolution, or embrace the existence of a Loch Ness monster if new facts demand it. I just want to be the one on the side of reality, don't you? Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins is one of the world's most prominent and outspoken atheists. He delivered a powerful case against belief in his excellent book, The God Delusion. I'm a longtime fan of his work, and I think The God Delusion is a positive contribution to the world. His goal is to encourage more people to think and stop wasting their time and intellectual potential on religious beliefs. Clearly, this is a message the world needs to hear. However, there is a tone that emerges from some of the pages within the God Delusion that may suggest to some believers that Dawkins thinks that they're all a bunch of idiots and that atheists are a higher form of life. Although I am on Dawkins' side and I don't think his book was an all-out and no-holds assault on religion, I do understand why some believers feel this way. To be clear, Dawkins believes in freedom of thought. He is not the atheist version of the Inquisition. He hasn't called for religion to be made a crime. He doesn't want to see people jailed for praying. His hope is that people simply will realize that gods are not real so that they can get on with more positive and productive pursuits. But while his arguments are direct and powerful, I'm not sure they'll hit home as his argument. I'm sorry, but while his arguments are direct and powerful, I'm not sure they will hit home with as many believers as they might have. For example, Dawkins sometimes refers to believers as quote unquote faith heads. I'll go out on a limb and guess that believers don't like that. Faith head sounds a lot like an insult. Okay, maybe some believers' heads are filled with too much of that intellectual poison called faith. But why call them faith heads? It's counterproductive, and more importantly, it's wrong to suggest that believers in general are dim or incapable of reasoning. Many of today's atheists were once faith heads. There is always the potential for skepticism and reason to sink in. We can't just give up on people. I mean, yes, many religious claims are undeniably ridiculous, but one must never forget that millions of people are herded into holding these ideas because of the overwhelming power of family and culture. Calling them names because they have these beliefs is like making fun of someone because in their society people wear odd hats or eat strange food. It's a form of intellectual ethnocentrism, sometimes directed against believers that is unfair. Non-believers must never forget how complex people are. Just because someone has a few potholes in his or her thinking is not a good reason to declare their mind a dead end. Smart people can be dumb about a few things and still be smart people. I don't think that atheists necessarily are superior to believers by any meaningful measure. Yes, they're not going to hate and kill you in the name of a god, but there are many other factors that influence what kind of person the atheist is. An atheist might hate and kill you based on what sports team you cheer for or which political party you support. Not believing in a god does not guarantee that a person will be morally superior any more than believing in a god means that a person will be an anti-science dolt. As with gender, race, and nationality, it is usually a mistake to generalize. Dawkins is excellent at dismantling the arguments of believers who still think that they can prove their gods are real. But the way in which he knocks down their house of cards sometimes warrants a bit of criticism. Although some believers may respond well to being intellectually thumped, I suspect that most who are courageous enough to invest the time to read The God Delusion may come away offended and feeling as if they had been scolded and maybe even pushed around by a bully. Again, I completely understand and sympathize with how Dawkins feels. He obviously is frustrated and irritated by religion because it so often discourages thinking while encouraging people to do bad things. But I'm not sure that tough talk is an effective way to encourage a fellow human being to embrace reason and reconsider the validity of his or her cherished religious beliefs. In my own experiences, arguing over religion, I have won many battles, but few wars. The only people I have ever felt that I might have influenced in a meaningful and lasting way were those who I simply shared a friendly chat with. Battering a believer with logic and data is usually a waste of everyone's time. Having a sincere talk with someone you respect as a fellow human can change everything. I don't know, maybe believers are right. Maybe there really is a shortage of polite and humble atheists in the world today. But regardless of whether this is reality or perception, atheists need to reach out to believers and encourage them to rethink their gods in a way that believers will listen to. I think this matters a great deal because the world can't take too much more religion. We can't afford to have billions of people loving their gods much more than each other for much longer. Nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons hang over our heads. We are devastating the natural environment that we will all depend on. Half the population is still far too poor. Meanwhile, belief in gods inspires a constant assault on science and human rights. Religious belief fuels the worst form of terrorism. Isn't killing and dying for a god worse than killing and dying for land, money, or a flag? At least we all agree that those things are real. Belief turns us against one another in a time when we need to cooperate more than ever. Religion is too great a threat to the world for it not to be confronted and taken down a peg or two by those who respect reality and believe in the positive potential of humankind. But how? If more atheists would stop trying to win arguments and concentrate instead on offering their fellow humans a hand up from irrational beliefs, we might actually achieve the progress we need to survive in the 21st century. I am not suggesting that religion must be eradicated like some disease. There are many good things about religion, and it is too deeply intertwined with human culture to be unceremoniously jettisoned anyway. However, I do believe that atheists can show believers that there is absolutely no reason to take religion so seriously that it devours common sense and basic respect for other humans. But to make any headway, atheists have to respect believers as equals rather than think of them as a hypnotized subspecies. A popular mantra among believers is hate the sin, love the sinner. Atheists might consider adopting a version of that. Hate the irrational belief, but love the believer. Atheists who respect life and care about our world have an obligation to share their worldview with those who need it most. Otherwise, humankind may never wake up from its ancient dreams. Religious belief for most people is not a logical conclusion that they arrived at after researching the world's faiths and deciding on the most sensible one. For the individual, religious belief usually comes during childhood and is wrapped up with many values and loyalties developed at the same time. Belief in a god or gods becomes a part of who they are. This belief in a god is more like a close friend, a sibling, or parent that is some cold concept in one's head or a club membership. The connection to a god is deep and strong for many believers. It won't be shaken easily. Losing a heated debate to an atheist usually doesn't make a dent in faith. The believer who did not make a rational choice to believe is unlikely to make a rational choice to stop believing. There are other things at play here. There's feelings, there's love, there's intuition, there's loyalty. The best a compassionate atheist can do is to set the table of reason with all proper manners and etiquette, and then invite the believer to dine. Some atheists underestimate how serious the more passionate believers can be about their gods. This is no casual thing for many of them. Hard as it is to understand for an atheist, many believers are being honest when they say that they love their God. Belief is the most important part of their life, some say. I tend to believe them because I have seen their trembling hands and twitching bodies when they cried and prayed to their gods. I've seen this love and fire up close. I stood close by while Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and Jews prayed in their temples around the world. I've seen the tears run down their cheeks. I've heard the whispered word love from many believers. Sometimes it was beautiful, sometimes it was scary, but it was always sincere in my opinion. Name-calling, complicated sparring over fine points of logic and quoting dead philosophers won't put out the fire I've seen burning in the hearts of those people. Reason has virtually no chance when atheists approach the believers as bullies rather than friends, because they won't give an inch. It only makes them believe harder. Many atheists are too quick to dismiss the deep emotional commitment to belief that many people have. To a devout believer, it just doesn't matter if a non-believer bluntly declares that there's no scientific evidence for their God, and therefore it's unlikely that the God is real. It just doesn't register. They won't even listen to what's being said because it's seen as an attack, an attempt to blow the house down rather than as a knock on the door. Imagine if someone came along and told you that your favorite color was wrong and that there's no evidence that it is the superior color. How likely is it that this would make you denounce your favorite color? You probably picked your favorite color for unknown reasons in childhood and remained loyal to it all these years. My favorite color is blue. I would love for someone to try to tell me that blue is not the best color. I mean, why? Just look at it. It's such a calm and peaceful color. It's the color of the sea and the sky. It's the best color of all, and I don't care what anyone says to the contrary. I have faith that blue is best. Case closed. I have engaged in both forms of the atheist-believer clash over the existence of gods. I've had bitter battles with supremely confident believers. I also had friendly discussions with believers during which tough questions and contradictions came up. Without a doubt, the latter is more enjoyable, more productive, and far more likely to leave believers thinking in ways that they may never have before. I'm convinced that one cannot force a believer into a corner with scientific facts or scriptural errors and hope to achieve anything. If, for example, someone came at me ranting about flaws in the theory of evolution, I would react to their aggression by listening less to their ideas and concentrating more on how to launch my own arsenal of arguments at them. If, however, someone came to me and said that they want to know the truth about our origins, but evolution seems to fall short in their view, I would be willing to listen, at least for a while. I don't go looking for it, but if I find myself in the presence of a true believer and we drift onto the topic of gods, I most always ask questions. That's right, I just ask How they know their holy book is a collection of words from a God. How they know the universe was made by their God. How they know the apocalypse is almost upon us, and so on. I let them do most of the talking. After listening for a while, I asked more questions. Socrates figured it out a long time ago. Asking questions is a great way to teach. Asking believers questions about their gods is better for everyone. It also is far more interesting and educational for the atheist because it offers a chance to learn more about how believers think and why it is they actually believe. For the curious believer, I imagine that hearing politely delivered yet challenging questions can be an eye-opening experience. I wouldn't be surprised if many questions from such an exchange linger in some minds for many years. Posing questions rather than simply firing off facts also tends to keep things friendly and pleasant. There is a world of difference between "there are no gods" and "how do you know that your God is real and all the others aren't?" The former tends to end meaningful conversations, while the latter starts them. Perhaps the charge some believers make is true. Maybe too many atheists really do lack sufficient humility. After all, shouldn't we non-believers be the most humble people on earth? I mean, remember, we are the ones who don't know much of anything when it comes to the big questions. We are the people who don't know why or exactly how the universe started. We don't know how life started on Earth. We don't know with absolute certainty what happens to us after we die. Yes, compared to believers, we don't know much at all. Atheists definitely should be the most humble people of all. Chapter 21. I don't lose anything by believing in my God. Starts with a quote from Bernard Berenson, where it says, "I wish I could stand on a busy street corner, hat in hand, and beg people to throw me their wasted hours." Men in expensive suits work the aisles with quiet, focused efficiency. Like robots, they move through the audience without saying a word. No need to. Everyone knows what they want. The believers fill the collectors' containers with their money. I see 20s, 50s, hundreds, and checks go into the containers. Some believers request credit card slips from the collectors. The pace of this massive money transfer is impressive. Hundreds of people who came to take away God's word are leaving behind a considerable fortune. The collectors pick up the pace. They empty pockets and purses like emotionless army ants, efficiently dismembering a still living grasshopper for transport back to the nest. Meanwhile, the preacher up on stage repeats over and over how important it is to give money to God. He warns the faithful that God knows exactly how much they can give and how exactly much they do give. Even more cash flies into the containers. God made a lot of money tonight. Or did he? Some believers won't reconsider their conclusions about the reality of a God or gods because they don't recognize that the pay a believer, back up. Let me start over. Some believers won't reconsider their conclusion about the reality of a God or gods because they don't recognize that they pay a price for believing. It's all gain and no loss, say many believers. So why rock the boat? Why question it? Why think? Just keep on believing. First of all, I would suggest that nothing should be off limits to questioning, not even cherished religious beliefs. The safest policy is to leave everything in life open to skepticism and analysis. No matter how wonderful something may seem, shutting off one's mind is risky. Skepticism, by the way, is not the dirty word some believers seem to think it is. Skepticism simply means thinking once or twice before accepting anything as true. What can possibly be wrong with that? Skepticism is a positive attitude, and being a skeptic is a smart way to navigate through life. It should never be confused with cynicism. A cynic may drip with negativity and scorn, but a skeptic merely questions claims before believing them. There's nothing negative about that. Despite what believers say, religion seems to cost believers a lot from the atheist perspective. This is not to say that there are not real and significant benefits to believing. For example, a believer who attends worship services might be healthier because she has a network of friends who will encourage her to get regular medical checkups as well as check on her when she's ill. But this could be a benefit of Islam and not necessarily Allah. Anthropologists say we are a social species, and psychologists say we depend heavily on relationships from our happiness. So when a man finds joy in praying with others, it could be the people who make him happy and not necessarily the Hindu god he worships. Benefits that often come from belonging to a belief system do not prove that any particular god is real. However, because so many believers claim that believing in a god is cost-free, a closer look is warranted to see if this is true. It is safe to say that belief in gods can claim a heavy toll from believers. This cannot be denied because there are many examples of believers destroying family relationships, losing jobs, draining life savings, and even killing or being killed in the name of a god. However, it's too easy to criticize unpopular religions that make extreme demands on members. Believers like to call them cults to make them seem significantly different from popular religions. They forget, however, that virtually all religions passed through a time in which they were all labeled cults. Most believers understand that it would be a mistake to sell their house and car just because someone told them that the end of the world is next week. Most believers understand that it's wrong to release poisonous gas into a subway station. But what many people may not realize is that believing, no matter if it is within a popular or in a peaceful religion, it's not free. A price is paid. Money is not the only price of belief, but it is a good place to start. Believers around the world spend many billions of dollars each year on their gods. So many religions that cannot see eye to eye on anything else are somehow able to agree on one thing, that God needs a lot of money. A god may be able to create a galaxy for nothing, but to get anything done here on Earth apparently requires cash. Those who claim to speak for the gods say that giving money to a god is the right thing to do. So, some go so far as to warn of severe punishment from a god for those who do not give. Many believers are encouraged to give so that they can get an even bigger return from their god. Some religious leaders tell believers that their donation is like an investment that is guaranteed to pay off many times over. To the atheists, this all sounds very sus. First of all, why do gods need so much money? If they can make a universe, can't they make $100 bill? I mean, what the fuck are we talking about here, folks? Like, what? What is it that they need to buy anyway? The weirdest thing of all about believers giving money to their god is that none of them ever give money to a god. Okay, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, Alexander the Great, and other quote-unquote human gods may have collected funds in person. Other than them, however, no purely supernatural god has ever made a confirmed appearance on Earth to personally accept the believer's donations. What happens instead is that believers give their money to a middleman, usually one who is wearing very expensive clothes and living in a very big house. Why do believers do this? Wouldn't it make more sense to just burn the cash as an offering to their god in some sort of ritual? Just burn the money. Interestingly, some Chinese people do something very similar to that. They burn paper money in hopes of sending it to the afterlife for use there. Or maybe a believer could be creative and give their money to the most needy people on Earth, people who any good god should be concerned about. How about giving quote-unquote God's money to a few of those 9 or 10 million children who die each year in the developing world for lack of food or a $2 vaccination? Giving money to them might impress any real gods more than giving it to some holy man with a private jet. Stating the obvious that religion is big business, it's not meant to be insulting or an attack on believers. Surely all believers see that religion is one of the oldest and most effective ways to make money. One can argue whether the money is doing the work of a god or not, but the fact that religion is a booming global industry is clear. Admittedly, just because so much money is flying around in the name of so many gods is not evidence of fraud, though. But what it means, however, is that many people on this planet today are wasting a lot of their money. The undeniable truth is that most believers in the world today who regularly give money to a god are throwing their money away because the god is not real or the religion is invalid. How, for example, can the Christian who gives money to help fund the distribution of Bibles and the Muslim who gives money to fund the distribution of Qurans both be right about the wise use of their money? Either one of them or both of them are wasting their cash pushing a book that is wrong. The Bible and Quran contain opposing claims that cannot be reconciled. Therefore, at least one of these believers is wasting their money. Some believers may argue that giving money to their God is a good decision no matter what, if the God is real or not, because the money goes to build schools, help the poor, or fund hospitals. But if schools, poor people, and hospitals are your concern, then why not give directly to those causes? When money is given to a religious organization, some of that money may indeed go to do good things. Inevitably, however, some portion of the money goes directly towards that organization's goals of marketing its claims about a particular god or gods who may or not be real. Most believers probably would agree that it's a mistake to donate money to a belief system that is based on a fictional god. The only thing it is wise to give money to their religion, they only think it's wise to give money to their religion because they think it is true and their God is real. Therefore, most believers probably agree with me that in most cases, giving money to some guy who says he works for a God is risky. The Catholic believer, for example, is very likely to agree with me that a Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, or Mormon should make a donation to UNICEF rather than to people employed within their respective belief systems. The typical Muslim is probably on my side as well. He agrees with me that giving money to a local Wiccan priestess is probably not the best financial move to make. Both Christian and Muslims would agree with me that the average Scientologist is probably better off keeping her money rather than giving it to Scientology officials. So really, there's a lot of agreement between believers and non-believers that too many people are giving their money away to organizations that are highly questionable. Most disturbing, regardless of whether gods are real or not, is the fact that many believers give away money that they or their families need. Not all, but some religious organizations and religious leaders beg or demand money from their followers in the most despicable, heartless manner imaginable. They bully, threaten, or make wild promises in order to squeeze every possible penny out of the faithful, no matter how poor they may be. How people who do this can sleep at night is beyond me. Again, I'm not necessarily condemning all religious leaders who ask for money. However, those who live in multi-million-dollar mansions should not be asking elderly people with little money to dig deep in their pockets and give to the Lord. I have known a few victims of this racket, and it's upsetting to say the least. People who are struggling economically should not be giving their money to a religious leader who is wearing a suit that costs more than they earn in 2 months. If the God really does need money, can't we all just wait until they ask for it themselves? Although a lot of cash is spent, donated, earned, and stolen in the world of religion, money isn't everything. Some people can afford to waste money. Some believers may feel it's worth it, even if the money is not used properly. It's their money, and if they feel good giving it away, then fine, fuck it. But what about time? Time may be more valuable than money. There are probably few believers who ever pause to consider just how much of their time they sacrifice for belief in a God. Suppose a believer spends 3 hours every weekend taking part in worship rituals with others, and then puts in another 2 hours with some sort of religious study group in the middle of the week. It adds up to 260 hours per year. Over 50 years, that's 13,000 hours, and this doesn't include time spent at special religious events, praying and reading religious books. Maybe atheists are wrong, and one of the gods really will give some believers an eternity of happiness after they die. But if atheists are right and the gods aren't really there, then wasting so much time is a tragedy. Believers agree with atheists about this in most cases. The Muslim thinks the Hindus are wasting their time worshiping all those gods, just as the Jew thinks the Christians are wasting their time worshiping a false messiah. Any given believer thinks most believers in the world today are worshiping an imaginary god, while the atheist thinks they're all wasting their time. We're all a lot closer to agreeing on this than most people realize. Many believers are quick to point out the wonderful bonds and networks that their religions provide. Yes, religions can be very good at bringing people together, but only in a limited sense. Unfortunately, religions do an even better job of keeping people apart. Disunity is usually overlooked or denied, but it is one of the significant costs people pay for believing in gods. Worst of all, everyone on earth pays for it, believers and non-believers alike, by having to live in a world constantly troubled by religion-inspired division, hatred, prejudice, and violence. It should come as no surprise to most believers that their religion promotes these things. Just read the Torah, the New Testament, or the Quran, for example. They do not promote tolerance and acceptance. Although some debate interpretations, they seem to clearly demand either allegiance or annihilation. Imagine the countless lives that have been diminished by the barbarities of by the barriers of prejudice that stand guard around within religions. Imagine all the friendships that never were because men said gods were against it. Imagine all the people who never learned anything about others from different backgrounds because they were not allowed to date or have friends outside their belief system. For millions of people to be denied full access to the human family is sad, and it's a significant price to pay for believing in gods. It also is nothing less than one of the most serious problems our world faces today. Why do Christians, Muslims, and Jews so often find it difficult to get along? Many would respond to that question with a lengthy list of historical crimes and modern grievances. But really the answer is that they don't get along because they think of themselves as living labels. They are Christians, Muslims, and Jews first, rather than humans first. Another big price that many people pay for their belief in the existence of a God is the loss of scientific curiosity. Now, this doesn't apply to all believers, of course. There are many who respect and appreciate science. Many believers haven't shut down their minds to obvious realities about our life, our world, and our universe. Unfortunately, millions have. In hopes of appeasing a God, they turn their back on science, in some cases, common sense. Although some believers and even some non-believers deny it, there really is a conflict between religion and science. Science attempts to explain things as we find them. This is done by discovery, observations, and experimentation. Religion is very different. It attempts to explain things by simply calling them magic and citing unproven claims of divine revelation. These are two very different ways of trying to figure out the universe, and they are not compatible. When one gets in the habit of accepting things based on the authority of an ancient book or the words of a religious leader, scientific curiosity suffers. There is no way around this. Faith is like kryptonite to the scientific mind. In 1994, I visited a rural school in northern India. The students ranged in age from about 7 to 12. They took turns reading from the Quran as they rocked back and forth. India is mostly Hindu, but also has many millions of Muslims in its population. The teacher told me that the Quran was the only book they wanted or needed because it contained everything that people need to know. I've seen American workbooks written by Christians for elementary school students that claim dinosaurs, such as the Tyrannosaurus Rex, were on Noah's Ark and are still alive in the wild somewhere today. There is definitely a cost. Our world loses something when millions of children are taught things that are probably not true in place of things that are probably true. Chapter 22, I didn't come from a monkey. When a believer is discussing evolution with an informed non-believer and things aren't going well, the believer often blurts out a strange retort. Well, I didn't come from a monkey. I've heard this so many times from so many believers, and I'm beginning to think that they view our furry little friends as the scourge of the earth. What is so bad about monkeys anyway? They're pretty smart and cute too. Why is coming from a monkey so much worse than coming from mud, dirt, a clot of blood, dust, or maize dough, as some religions claim? The truly weird aspect of this senseless controversy is that believers are the only ones who bring up this monkey shit. They have created a bogus claim in their head and then recoil in horror from it. The truth is, no credible evolutionary scientist, paleoanthropologist, geneticist, biologist, or primatologist would ever say that humans came from monkeys. It is simply not true based on current evidence, and anyone who knows anything about human evolution wouldn't say it is. When a believer hits me with the "I didn't come from a monkey" line, I respond by saying, "You're right. I didn't come from the lowly monkey, and neither did you. We both came from that glorious and noble ape known as Australopithecus afarensis." Believers usually react with blank stares and a trace of fear in their eyes. The simple explanation that many believers never hear, sadly, is that we do not come from monkeys or even modern apes such as chimps, bonobos, or gorillas. The reality, according to an abundance of fossil and genetic evidence, is that we, monkeys, apes, and humans, all share a common ancestor that lived many millions of years ago. The common ancestor might have looked similar to a modern monkey, but it was not a modern monkey. If this also upsets some believers, and I'm sure it does, then they should protest against the claim of a common ancestor and leave monkeys out of it. But when they shout their rejection of descent from monkeys, it's embarrassing because nobody with any sense has ever claimed that in the first place. An important detail to add is that most people do not know the difference between monkeys and apes. Working my way through college as a zoological educational assistant at a major United States zoo, I was surprised by how little most people know about modern primates. Most people, for example, are not aware that apes do not have tails and monkeys do. Most people incorrectly refer to chimps as monkeys. And very few people know anything about bonobos, easily the most fascinating apes of all, in my opinion. I suspect this widespread ignorance about our closest living relatives has a lot to do with the mass confusion about our evolutionary history. The fact that so many believers are misinformed about human evolution is partly the fault of religion's continual attack on science education. In most countries in the world today, very few people are taught in schools about the ancestors that we all owe our existence to. The stories told by fossils resting in laboratories and museums around the world never reach millions of believers because their religious leaders reject science whenever it threatens to contradict their ancient stories. To make matters worse, many religious leaders eagerly fill in the void with misinformation and lies, which make it even easier for people to reject evolution. Highly religious nations such as Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, the United States, Nigeria, and Turkey, for example, have banned or avoided the teaching of human evolution in schools to the point where a significant percentage of their populations are firmly against it without even knowing what it is. This is why so many believers end up saying strange shit like, my God is real because I ain't come from a monkey. If only they knew what they're missing out on. I gained a good understanding of human evolution in university classes, read numerous books on the topic, and continue to keep track of news about the latest ideas and discoveries. I've also interviewed two of the most prominent scientists in the world, Tim White, discoverer of the oldest biologically modern human fossils to date, and Donald Johanson, discoverer of the famous Australopithecus afarensis nicknamed Lucy. I find the subject thrilling and important. I connect with it because it's personal. It's about who I am. Learning about Homo ergaster and Homo habilis is like looking through an old family photo album or researching a great-great-great-grandfather. It's irresistible to anyone with a curious mind. How anyone can fail to find human evolution fascinating is a mystery to me. So much of it is inspirational. There was a long and dangerous path that led to us. Understanding it illuminates our important connection to the rest of nature. It also can help one think more clearly about our collective future. My awareness and acceptance of human evolution certainly hasn't degraded or dehumanized me like so many believers fear it can. For better or worse, this is our family history. I believe we're better for knowing it. The problem many believers have with human evolution is not about monkeys specifically, of course. It's the connection to anything non-human. They feel the suggestion of such a link is insulting. It's not like these believers would embrace Australopithecines if they knew about them. Evolution-phobic believers don't like any cracks in their imagined wall between humans and the rest of nature. They resist being pulled down from their pedestal into the animal kingdom. We're better than animals, declare these believers. We're above nature, blessed with a divine spark from a god, they say. I'm not so sure. I know history and follow current news, so I have my doubts about that. Contrary to the fears of some believers, admitting who we are, where we come from, and who we are related to does not condemn us to savagery. We have the most powerful brains on earth. We can use them to think ourselves clear of the destructive instincts we may have within us. We do not have to foul our own nest as we currently do. We do not have to kill our neighbors as we currently do. We do not have to be ignorant of our origins as most of us currently are. Believers who are anxious to put as much distance as possible between humankind and the rest of the animal kingdom should encourage science education rather than resist it. After all, it is science and science education, more than anything, that kept us out of the jungle. The Top 10 Myths About Evolution is a fine book that tackles common misunderstandings people have about evolution. Copies of it should be airdropped over every country with a population in denial about evolution. It even includes a chapter named People Come from Monkeys. Arthur Cameron Smith and Charles Sullivan write, "We can dismiss some critics' lamentation that believing in evolution will drag us down into the world of primates. We're already in it. Any stacks of data make it equally clear to any thinking person that people don't come from monkeys. Around 30 million years ago, the African primates diverged into two distinct groups, taking up different diets, habits, and habitats as their environments changed and opportunities arose. One group developed into apes, which included much later chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans. The other group developed into monkeys, and DNA and other studies prove that we belong to the ape group instead of the monkey group. Do people come from monkeys? Not at all. We share a common ancestor with chimpanzees, and before them with the group that became monkeys, but to say we come from monkeys is simply wrong, and evolution has never claimed it. Monkeys aside, religious people who say that accepting human evolution is incompatible with religion don't know much about religion. Today, there are hundreds of millions of people in a wide variety of religions who accept the obvious truth that humans evolved. For example, the late Pope John Paul II made it clear in 1996 that Catholics' belief in their God need not conflict with human evolution. The official Catholic position is that human evolution was their God's process of creation. Of course, there's no evidence that a God guides evolution, but I suppose it's possible. There are Muslims, Hindus, Mormons, even Baptists who accept evolution. Clearly, it is possible to believe in a God or gods without running away from human evolution. Many believers recognize that there simply is too much evidence to deny it, so they make their belief conform accordingly. Some people call it theistic evolution. I call it a good start. Chapter 23, I don't want to go to hell. This starts with a quote from Epicurus. It says, "Death, the most dreaded of all evils, is therefore of no concern to us. For while we exist, death is not present. And when death is present, we no longer exist." I think he's basically saying that when we die, once we are dead, we won't know it. As far as we know, we are alive. We are dying, but as the last memory we will have is of us dying. We won't know that we died. It's just one moment we'll be alive and the next we aren't. And once we aren't, we won't even know it happened. Many people say that their fear of hell is one of the reasons they believe in a God, but why? A desire to avoid ending up in hell is not a good reason to believe in a God. It might be a good reason to worship a particular God and to follow his or her rules, but it's not a reason to conclude that the God exists in the first place. Before one can fear hell, one must first believe that the God who created hell is real. For example, I don't believe in any gods, including those who might have created a hell for people like me to suffer in. Therefore, I don't worry about hell. I couldn't if I tried because it's just not real to me. Maybe it really does exist somewhere deep in the Earth's mantle, or maybe at the core itself. Maybe hell is in another dimension. It could be that I am in for a terrible surprise after I die, but I doubt it. I'm open-minded and willing to be convinced that hell is real, but until then, I simply can't bring myself to fear something that no one in history has ever been able to show is real or even come up with any evidence for. It's just another story, no different than stories about trolls or haunted houses. If I believed in a God and hell, I imagine that an atheist's fearless attitude toward hell would bother me. How could I explain the lack of concern? Assuming the atheist was sane and had a normal distaste for fire and pain, how could he or she be not worried about hell? Like, something must be wrong. Why would a God set up this horrible place of punishment and then make its existence appear so vague and uncertain that hundreds of millions of thoughtful and well-meaning people don't believe it even exists? Surely a God with any sense of justice would not want to trick people into hell. Whatever purpose hell is supposed to serve, shouldn't the God who sends people there make sure that the danger is obvious to everyone? Wouldn't that be the least a God could do for us? I mean, it all seems a bit devious and evil otherwise. It's as if hell is meant not only to scare and motivate true believers, but also to work as a cruel trap to snare all those who made the mistake of being skeptical and thinking critically about religious claims. If hell is real, isn't spending eternity there a bit much? I mean, who in their right mind can possibly believe that punishing someone forever is reasonable? Have you ever thought about how long forever is? Just wait 1 trillion years and you'll be no closer to the end than you are right now. But these gods who create hells, we are told, seem to have no problem tossing atheists and people who believe in the wrong God into the fire forever. And for what? Because they doubted? Because they thought? Because they were born and raised in the quote unquote wrong belief system? People deserve eternal punishment for that. Are you serious? Worst of all, in my opinion, is the claim by many believers that those who believe in the wrong gods will be condemned to hell. Okay, the atheists may have thought things over and decided to pass on belief, but many people were born into families and societies that strongly pushed a particular god or gods on them virtually from birth. They hardly had much of a chance to think for themselves and find the quote-unquote real God. If I had been born into a poor family in rural Pakistan, for example, I might have ended up with the same views on gods that I have now, but the odds would have been heavily against it. Chances are I would be a fundamental Muslim today and well on my way to spending eternity in the Christian hell. Had I been born in Utah to Mormon parents, however, chances are I would be a devout Mormon right now and well on my way to the Islamic hell. Believers who care about other people and about justice must ask themselves if it is really a crime to believe in the wrong God or in no gods. If so, are they crimes that deserve eternal punishment? By the way, I am aware that some people prefer to believe in a softer, cooler hell, one in which there is no torturing and no fire. Where they get these details from, I have no idea, but they claim hell is nothing more than existing apart from a God's love. Sounds like the ultimate timeout for bad behavior. Nobody spanks you, but you can't see your friends or play in heaven. You just have to stand in the corner like forever. While it sounds better than roasting in a lake of fire forever, it's still a severe punishment. If heaven is real, being excluded from the best thing ever just because you trusted what your misguided parents or society told you about religion seems too harsh. By the way, will the 1 billion Hindus alive today eventually go to both the Christian and the Islamic hell simultaneously? Or will they somehow split time between both? How does that work? During the buildup to the 2003 invasion of Iraq by U.S. and coalition forces, there was a flood of government press conferences, TV documentaries, and news reports that described the despicable behavior of Saddam Hussein and his sons. Their apparent fondness for having rivals and enemies tortured was condemned repeatedly by appalled politicians, generals, pundits, and scholars. I noticed a recurring theme that stressed how these attacks by Iraq's ruling family were immoral and unjustified, no matter what the victims had been accused or convicted of. What struck me as odd was that many of those who were upset by Saddam's use of torture, President George W. Bush for one, claimed to be followers of a belief system that is supposed to include eternal torture for billions of people. It seemed inconsistent. I thought for people to get so worked up about one dictator who had a few hundred or a few thousand people tortured over a period of several years, when they did not seem troubled at all by their God, who, according to them, has been torturing billions of people for thousands of years and will continue to torture them forever. Why is it that so often our sense of morality and fairness seems to divert? I don't know. It's just like a smudge and I can't read the word. Higher standard than the gods. Hell is just one more unproven religious claim. But it is special as the most barbaric and immoral one of all. By the measure of common human decency, isn't it obviously wrong for an all-powerful God to brutalize people forever because they failed to believe or failed to worship in the correct way, or failed to behave in the correct way, or simply made the honest mistake of worshiping the wrong God? If my baby jammed a peanut butter and jelly sandwich into my new DVD player, I would forgive him within minutes. I once interviewed a woman who was subjected to cruel medical experiments as a child by the infamous Dr. Mengele in Auschwitz, the Nazi death camp. While she never forgot, she did forgive. Why is forgiveness so much easier for us than it is for some gods? If my children were to turn their backs on me one day and deny me love and respect, I would not wish them pain for 5 seconds, much less eternity. There's nothing they could do that would make me want to punish them forever. People who believe in a hell might consider asking why their God is so mean and unforgiving. Better yet, they might ask why their God left no clear evidence of hell so that all of us would at least know to fear it and try to avoid ending up there. Finally, I would encourage believers to consider how it is they can believe in the existence of both a good God and a bad hell. I know it's very important for most believers to think of their God as not only good, but very good. But how could such a God operate a torture chamber? Believers cannot have it both ways. Either your God is good, not real, or your hell is not real. Wait a minute, I said that wrong. It says either your good God is not real, or your hell is not real. Or neither are real. I feel my God when I pray. And this is chapter 24. Although the intelligent design argument may get more attention these days, a justification for belief that is more difficult to challenge is the claim by many believers that they feel the presence of their God or gods when they pray. Many believers in many religions have told me that they know God is real simply because they feel him. How does one dispute a believer's claim that they saw a God, heard a God, or in some way felt a God without insulting that person? I have found that it is not easy to have a respectful, well-meaning conversation about such claims. No matter how gentle the challenge is delivered, believers tend to interpret it as an accusation that they are either lying, unintelligent, or mentally ill. It's a tough position for a non-believer to be in, particularly one who genuinely cares about the feelings of believers. For example, when a believer says, "God spoke to me," my first instinct is to ask whether or not it was an actual audible voice that was heard, or possibly just the believer's own thoughts that were incorrectly attributed to a God. But some believers have it interpreted that as rude and insulting. The non-believer must navigate carefully through a minefield to get anywhere with this one. One believer told me that he had heard the actual voice of his God. He said the words were audible and could have been captured by a voice recorder if one had been available at the time. I asked him how he was sure that the incident was not imagined or some sort of hallucination. I reminded him that many people see and experience things that are not real every day around the world. It does not mean that they are mentally ill or lack intelligence. The brain is not reliable 100% of the time. Brains make mistakes. We are all capable of misinterpreting events, misremembering events, and imagining things that are not there. I asked the believer who said he heard a God how he can be sure that he did not imagine it. It was at this point that I began to sense his rising irritation and decided not to push any further. So, how does one question this amazing but common claim of personal contact with a God? I believe there is a way. There's a crucial fact about the phenomenon of believers feeling or hearing a God that cripples it as an argument for the existence of gods. When they understand it, honest believers have little choice but to rethink their position. It turns out that there's nothing unusual about sensing the presence of things that do not really exist. To prove this, we need only to look at the claims of believers themselves. It may surprise believers who do not know much about other religions, but claims of personal contact with gods are common, close to universal in human culture. It's nothing new. Believers have been claiming to hear gods and feel the presence of gods for thousands of years. People who make this claim today must recognize that countless millions of other believers have heard or felt different gods. This is key. Different God, same experience. This is a strong indication that believers are reporting some kind of psychological event that is common to the human mind, rather than evidence of actually making contact with gods. Suppose, for example, a man hears Allah or an angel tell him to convert to Islam. Is this proof that Allah is real and Islam is the only true religion? A typical Christian might be too skeptical to agree with that, especially if she recently heard the voice of Jesus calling her to Christianity. And what about the animist believer who hears the voice of a God speak to him when the wind blows at night? What about tribal people who say that they were visited by animal spirits during a vision quest? The Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Jews, animists, Rastafarians, ancient Greeks, and so forth, who claim to have made contact with their gods, cannot all be right about what they experienced. The only explanation that works is that most, if not all, of the believers who claim to have heard, seen, or felt God are honestly mistaken about what they experience. This does not mean that people who make these claims are lying, dumb, or crazy. It just simply means they're human. There's a tremendous amount of psychological energy that comes into play when the fires of religion heat up the human mind. Many believers cry, convulse, speak unknown languages, laugh uncontrollably, or scream during worship rituals. It's stunning to see adults, tears stream down their cheeks, wave their hands at the sky, and shout up to their God. Yet some are probably just going along with the crowd, trying to fit in and follow the script. But I'm willing to believe that many of them really are experiencing a powerful psychological event in their minds. Some of the behavior that I have observed was too intense to be explained as a conscious performance, in my judgment. I've seen, for example, believers' bodies vibrate and twitch with a speed and intensity that would be impossible for most people to fake. I was convinced that there was a genuine explosion of excitement and emotion going on in their minds while under the spell of religion. It is not far-fetched to suspect that a belief capable of generating such mental fireworks can also occasionally generate hallucinations. Consider alien abductions. There are people who claim to have been kidnapped by aliens. The most common theme involves humans. Hold on, let me back up. The most common theme involves victims being immobilized, taken away, studied, and then returned. Just as it is with believers of gods, however, no alien abduction victim has ever produced any evidence to back up their story. So how do God believers feel about alien abduction claims? Some accept them as true, undoubtedly, but many are skeptical enough to have doubts. They probably would suggest that the person is either making it up or had some kind of dream they only seemed was real to them. But why do these God believers have a double standard? If one person hears or sees a God, and that is considered proof that the particular God is real, then why can't we consider alien abduction stories to be proof that extraterrestrial beings are here on Earth, snatching and probing people at will? My advice to believers who are sure they felt or heard a God's voice is to be skeptical and remember that believers have been hearing those same whispers from many gods for many centuries. I'm going to stop right there. We are at chapter 25, titled, I Need My God to Protect Me. So we've officially read 10 chapters today. We started at chapter 14, and we just completed chapter 24. So that's where we're going to leave it today. And in case you forgot, we are reading 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God by Guy P. Harrison. Each chapter is a different reason. So we've already gone through 24 reasons why people believe in gods, and we still have 25 reasons to go. So yeah, so there's that. So in case you want to get the book, that's why I'm telling you, you know what I'm saying? So if you're like, yo, that book sounds dope. Well, first of all, you're correct. This book is fucking dope. I mean, it's only the 3rd/4th time that I'll be reading this book. I've already completely read it twice. But yeah, working on the 3rd/4th reading, because I'm already reading it in my personal time. Because I'm beyond chapter 23. I mean, chapter 25, but actually, no, wait, hold on. No, I'm not. So now I've officially caught up with y'all. I've officially caught y'all up to where I am. So I'm at chapter 25, and now we are all at chapter 25. So yeah, so chapter 25 is I Need My God to Protect Me. I'm going to go get some coffee real quick. If you want me to continue reading one more chapter 25, just like put the smiling face emoji or some shit. I'm gonna go get some coffee, and I come back and see a bunch of smiling face emojis, I know to read the next chapter. If I come back and don't see it, like if it's just regular emojis or no emojis or y'all ain't say nothing or y'all a bunch of no's or whatever, then that's what it'll be. It's not gonna take me long to make this coffee, by the way. I just need to like boom, boom, pow, like Black Eyed Peas, and then I'll be right back. In the meantime, I want to here. Here, let me turn it toward my cat. Y'all can look at her in the meantime. Rosie, keep them busy. I'll be right back. I gotta get some coffee. Keep them entertained. Talk to the people. Rosie, talk to the people. Damn. Pete, where you finna hold? Who Pete? No, we're not doing it. Rosie, did you keep him entertained? Y'all look at this. I just copped this shit today. Hold on. Look at that. International Delight. Southern Butter Pecan. Are you fucking kidding me right now, son? I seen that shit at the store like, yo, I need that. So I got some. This shit better. And oh my God. And I already done had some. This shit go. I mean, I see some smiling emojis. Maybe that's I don't see a lot though. I guess it's a no-go on that next chapter. It's cool. What is the book? 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God by Guy P. Harrison. It's not even that big a book. Like, see, I guess not that big. Ain't that right, Rosie? You read this book, Rosie? No? Fuck out of here. All right, fuck it. I'll read one more. Chapter 25. And then that's it, goddammit. And then I'm done. Then I might go like record some more fucking shorts. One of the benefits of believing in a God who cares about you is the reassurance that you are watched over and protected by the most powerful being in the universe. As a child, I often asked for protection from the God that I believed in, or at least tried very hard to believe in. I didn't hesitate to ask for help when I was desperate, whether it was to shield me from disaster, on a tough math test, or to react fast enough to line drives hit my way while playing shortstop in Little League. I can't remember how reassuring those silent prayers might have been, but I assume they served some purpose, or I probably wouldn't have bothered. But as the years went by, I learned that the God my immediate society told me about was only one of many gods. And the way I was taught to worship this God was just one of many ways to worship him. By the time I reached my early 20s, it dawned on me that none of these gods seemed very real, and worshiping them in any way didn't seem like a very wise use of time. So there I was, all alone in the world with no gods to protect me as I made my way through life. Was I scared? Was I terrified of facing adversity, failures, and misfortune all by myself? Not at all. I figured I had already been on my own all these years before, whether I had realized it or not. Nothing had changed except my perception. How could I miss what was never really there? In the 1990s, I completed a long solo journey around the world. For month after month, I had no friends, family, or gods to keep company or watch my back. It was just me and my Lonely Planet travel books. I don't want to make it more than it was, but there was a few dangerous and difficult moments along the way. In Africa, for example, I was struck with a mysterious fever while on a poor man's safari in Kenya. I was terrified that I might have contracted malaria or something worse. I spent an entire day on my back, trembling uncontrollably in a tiny tent far away from any towns or hospitals. It was not the best of times for me. My brain was close to cooking, and I wondered if this was going to be the end of me. That night, I left my tent to urinate in the bushes. I felt a little better, and the cool night air was a welcome change from the stifling tent. I believed that I was going to be okay, and foolishly wandered a few hundred yards from my campsite. At some point during the walk, I blacked out and collapsed in the tall grass. I awoke sometime later in the night to discover a Maasai warrior standing over me. It was a scary situation. I couldn't tell if he was planning to kill me or ask if I knew the latest World Cup results. Looking up from my submissive position in the grass, the tall man looked extraordinarily fearsome. I still clearly remember how his metal spear tips sparkled in the moonlight. After a long and awkward period of staring at each other and exchanging a few mutually incomprehensible words, I decided that I needed to appear a bit more manly and less of a pushover in case this was going to turn ugly. So I rose to my feet, inflated my chest, and tried to look as confident and capable as any sickly, dehydrated, and disoriented man can look. The Maasai said something. I forced a smile and slowly backed away while still facing him. Fortunately, he let me go without any confrontation, and I made it back to my campsite. The next morning, the Maasai man came to the camp and spoke with my safari guide. Turns out that he had found me lying there in the bush, easily the most pathetic tourist in all of Africa that night. He said he guarded me for a couple of hours while I slept off my days because a lion was prowling nearby and he believed I was in serious danger. I was happy to be able to thank him for his kindness. I didn't think about it until much later, but throughout the ordeal of sickness and even when I awoke in the bush in the shadow of that scary spear tip, I never once prayed for God to help me. Somehow I found the strength to ride out both the fever and the fear all by myself. One day in Nepal, I was feeling exceptionally strong and ambitious, so I made a spontaneous decision to climb a mountain by myself. I was very fit, and it was a tiny mountain by Himalayan standards, so it didn't seem like a foolhardy thing to attempt. To my surprise, however, reaching the summit almost killed me, so not that it wasn't worth it. Atop my own personal Himalayan hill, I experienced the unusual joy of standing inside a cool cloud as it lingered in the sky. My natural high faded fast, however, when I discovered that some 20 leeches had infiltrated my pants. Fortunately, they made it no higher than my knees, so I suppose it could have been much worse. The little beasts were firmly attached to my legs, and some were even inside my socks. One white sock had turned completely red, soaked through with my blood because I unknowingly had crushed a couple of bloated leeches while climbing. I was too tired to panic, but it was a bad feeling to have so many creatures simultaneously feasting on my blood. Apparently, the stealthy little monsters had slithered up my pant legs during the climb through the thick bush at the base of the mountain. As I stared in disbelief at my leech-covered lower legs, I realized that I was out of drinking water and starting to feel very thirsty, a condition that probably was accelerated by the high altitude. I felt exhausted in a way I had never before experienced. Nepal is a beautiful country with a fascinating culture and lovely people, but it never seemed to have quite enough oxygen to suit my taste. I suddenly realized that I had to get off this mountain before the sun set, or I would have serious problems finding my way back to the village in the dark. So I peeled off the leeches as gently as I could and let them go. No reason to kill creatures for doing what they have to do, I figured. After enjoying my moment on the summit and breathing in a bit of that cloud, I raced down the mountain. My legs ached and my lungs struggled to keep up. I moved as fast as I could without being reckless. Halfway down, I was still terrified that I wouldn't beat the sunset, but all I could do was keep moving. Interestingly, never once did I feel the need to ask a god for help. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other until I arrived where I wanted to be. I never would have imagined that one could be surrounded by millions of people and feel lonely, but I was. Worn down by weeks of travel, risky food, and the constant barrage of con men, the dusty backstreets of Asia almost broke me. There was one haunting night in a rundown hotel in New Delhi, India, that I won't soon forget. I didn't cry that night, but I'm sure it was only because I was too tired to work up a tear. I had always believed that I could handle loneliness better than most. I love being alone. It's the best time for reading, writing, and thinking. Solitude had always been so good to me. I never imagined that I needed people around me all the time, the way so many others seemed to. That long night in India revealed how wrong I was. I was more lonely than I had ever been in my life. I was in pain, but I never asked a god to comfort me. I just laid back in the filthiest bed I have ever seen, stared up at the bug-infested ceiling, and began planning how I would make tomorrow a better day. These lowlights from my travels are personal and a bit embarrassing, but they're worth bringing up to demonstrate a point. When I was in danger or emotional distress, I never called out to a god. Believe me, I would have without hesitation if I thought there was any likelihood that a god would have heard my pleas and helped. I could have prayed to 1 or 100 gods, but in the end, I knew that I would be on my own to meet the challenges before me. I'm pretty sure that praying to gods for help and protection serves no practical purpose. The gods are probably invisible and silent because they're not there. One of the reasons their existence seems so unlikely is because they don't protect their believers. Our world is a place where suffering and loss are constant and indiscriminate. Good people get hit by buses and lightning at about the same rate as bad people do. Nothing could be more obvious than the complete absence of a God's justice and protection in this world. There certainly was no divine justice on the morning of December 26, 2004. The Indian Ocean seafloor convulsed for 8 minutes, to launch a tsunami that killed more than 200,000 people, many of them babies and children. Of course, among its victims were people who had prayed that morning and many times before. Didn't help, though. The massive surge of ocean water killed Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, and Jews. Drowning or being battered to death in debris-filled water is a horrible way to die. It's likely that most, if not all, of the believers who died that day screamed out for help from their God as the waters consumed them. But they still died. It's a tough challenge for believers to explain why their God kills people who pray to live. But they have answers. Some believers will argue that a God does hear the prayers and comforts the victims as they die. That's actually kind of funny, and sadistic. It's like, he heard you dying and he just wanted to make your suffering a little less so. It's like, or how about he just stop it altogether? I thought your God was all powerful. Anyway. Or they might claim that their God has to do what he has to do because of some master plan. This is the can't bake a cake without breaking some eggs theory. One of the most disturbing explanations I've heard from believers is that we all, quote unquote, deserve disasters like tsunamis because we are all, quote unquote, sinful. This is what belief in God does to the minds of some people. It actually leads them to think that babies are bad and deserve to be drowned in seawater. According to a study by the World Bank and the Indonesian government, 37% of the people killed by the 2004 tsunami were under the age of 18. Approximately 13% were infants. More than 7,000 children lost both of their parents. Some 32,000 children lost one parent. It's hard for an atheist to understand how children and babies deserve that. There is, of course, another possibility that fits perfectly with these disturbing facts. Perhaps people die tragically, seemingly for no reason, because there are no gods watching over us. Couldn't natural disasters such as tsunamis, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, droughts, and tornadoes be unintelligent and indifferent events that can strike down anyone, anywhere, regardless of which god they pray to? This seems to be the most likely explanation because it matches the reality we see in our world. Many believers operate under the mistaken assumption that life is too difficult to go it alone without a God. They think that not believing in a God would be reckless, like going through life with a death wish. One must have a God to learn to lean on during hard times, they say. One needs a God for security. But this is not necessarily true. I believe that we all possess a lot more inner strength than we give ourselves credit for. Believers who say they must rely on their faith in a God to make it through life may be selling themselves short. I see no reason to think that the world's atheists are all psychologically stronger and more confident than the world's believers. Believers can do it alone. Most likely, they already have been on their own anyway. They just have never realized it or admitted it. Too many believers refuse to admit the obvious. Their God does not protect them. Of the popular gods today, all of them appear to be either unable or unwilling to keep people safe. For example, Christians who claim that Jesus protects them might visit a nearby hospital and take note of the Christians, including children and teenagers, who are there suffering from painful diseases and injuries. Most of the people in Darfur who have been facing forced relocation, rape, and murder for years are Muslims or Christians. I'm sure that they've prayed to Jesus or Allah for protection, but for tens of thousands of them, neither Jesus nor Allah helped them when the Janjaweed attacked. Millions of believers around the world are hit with everything from AIDS to abusive spouses, from house fires to hurricanes. If a God is keeping any one group of believers safe from misfortune, it's a mystery who these protected people are. More than one believer has told me that I will know their God is real one day when something terrible happens to me. They never consider the possibility that a bad event in my life has led me to someone else's God. You never thought about that, huh? Like, maybe I will come to God. It just won't be yours. Then you'll be thinking I'm wrong still, huh? Dumbass. Anyway. More than one. They suggest that I need a tragedy to bring me to my knees and humble me so that I will turn to their God for help. Could a personal tragedy or crisis force me to cry out for Allah, Jesus, or Hanuman? Maybe. It might happen if I'm at the end of my rope. But so what? When humans reach out for gods in troubling times, it does not mean that gods are actually there. If people really do need gods to get through life, then they may say something about human psychology, but it says nothing about the existence or non-existence of gods. Neither a god. Needing a god is not proof that the God is real. The world we see around us seems to run precisely as one imagines it would run without any gods involved. Haven't the last several thousand years of human history been pretty much what one would expect from a species that has nothing to work with but its own talents and flaws? Christians may say their life is too difficult to live without Jesus, but more than 1 billion Muslims manage to do it somehow. Muslims say that the life is impossible without Allah's guidance and protection, but for some 400 million Buddhists, they pulled it off quite nicely. I once worked as a live-in supervisor at a residential facility for abused and neglected children. It was the worst job I ever had. It was also the best job I ever had. Every day was an emotional roller coaster ride with very troubled kids who had been abandoned, beaten, or sexually abused. In most cases, it was their parents or a close relative who abused or neglected them. They were let down by the very people they trusted more than anyone else in the world. These kids, ranging in age from about 9 to 13, would have frequent destructive or violent outbursts. Often, I was the only thing standing between them and serious injury to themselves or someone else. I was trained to use a simple technique called containing in these situations. It was really nothing more than holding a child in a bear hug until he or she regained self-control. Although I had to do it many times, I never got used to it. Holding a deeply wounded child and riding out the storm with him or her was both physically and emotionally draining of me. I could feel the waves of hurt, rage, and confusion inside of them as they struggled against my grip. I walked away from those incidents with tears in my eyes many times. Some believers may argue otherwise, but I'm fairly certain that no gods were watching over those children. It was just me and the kids in that room, and I could never do enough to help them. Those children had lived horror stories that were consistent with a world that has no protective gods. If there really are invisible guardians around us, like so many believers claim, then why do they not do a better job of helping children like the ones I had to stop from cutting themselves and punching brick walls? If no God helps these little ones, then how can believers be so sure that a God is there for them? And that's where I'll end it. Thanks for listening to the 25th chapter. I'm glad y'all were, was cool about reading one more chapter. I'm gonna let y'all go, and I'm gonna continue reading so I know what the rest says, and then I'm gonna get back with y'all probably. I don't know, man. It ain't gonna be tomorrow. I know that for sure. So it might be like Wednesday or something. Damn, Wednesday? Yeah, dog. Probably won't be till Wednesday when I read the next chapter. So anyway, the next chapter is chapter 26, and the title is I Want Eternal Life. That is chapter 26. So we are more than halfway done with the book. So yeah, we're gonna leave it there. Thanks y'all for watching. Sorry I didn't respond. Thanks to the moderators, mostly Mary Jane and Tin Man. You know what I'm saying? If they was present, you know what I mean? Yeah, so I'm gonna holler at y'all, dog. Good looking out. Holla back.